I just want to say welcome to week 2 of Healthy Habits, Eat Well, Be Well. This week we are focusing on the art of goal setting and some strategies to really help you implement some of those new habits that you are hoping to form and possibly break some of those that you would rather not have in your life. So to start off with this week, we want to think big. We got to start smart. We're going to talk a lot more about SMART goals today and really what that means. But just very simply, a SMART goal, as a review from last week, is something that is very specific, that we can measure, that we can take action towards. We have action items. It's relevant to us, and it is timely. So again, we will talk a little bit more about that, but there's some really big pieces there that I definitely want to address just a little bit more. Hopefully, after last week, you've at least had a chance to watch the session from week 1, and hopefully had a chance to also figure out what your personal motivation is, utilizing these 7 steps to finding your motivation. If anyone's tuning in today and did not receive that, please reach out and let me know. And of course, I will make sure to send that to you. And of course, also as part of your homework last week, hopefully you had a chance to identify some of what the potential barriers in your life might be to you accomplishing what you want to accomplish, whether it's just a new habit that you're trying to implement, a long-term goal that you have, but possibly anticipating anything that could get in the way, as well as coming up with some potential plans for how you could get around those so that they are not in fact obstacles, but really only speed bumps, and we know how to get around them and we can continue moving even if it slows us down a little bit. There's so many different examples of what a potential barrier could be, and I could certainly help you identify some of those if you'd like, but really simple things. For example, life's going to happen. Your kids are going to get sick. You're going to have sudden deadlines that you weren't expecting. You'll have a family emergency or something that might get in the way of you taking an action that you would ordinarily take. A really simple example might be, let's say you've decided to start a walking program. And if you live here in Arizona, it's now very hot, or we're heading towards monsoon season. So if you get up one particular morning and you're ready to go for a walk, but it's pouring or it's already way too hot, what's your backup plan? Do you have an alternative? If we plan those things ahead of time, you're much less likely to back out of your new behavior and do something else to accomplish the same goal. All right, setting your intention. Once again, that really comes back to what your motivation is and what your mindset is. So pausing for just a moment, thinking about what you're currently doing with what you want to achieve in mind, what your goals are. And I want you to really think about as well, it is much more important to start than to succeed. The hardest part of developing a new habit is usually the getting started. Once you get moving in the right direction, you're very likely to keep moving. So as you're starting this new habit or new behavior, don't worry about perfection, but rather just start taking steps towards the desired outcome. Remember, you have to establish a habit before you can improve it. So what does that mean? Realistically, we have to get good at showing up for our appointments. We actually have to make it there rather than backing out and going for what I would call instant gratification. So the example that I just gave, if you're planning to go for a walk, but when you get up, it's already way too hot, or it's raining that morning, what's really tempting is to just go back to bed, just curl up and not do anything else. Whereas if you still show up for that workout that you planned on because you have a backup plan, then you're going to keep moving. But we still have to make sure that we show up. Another simple example of that before I move forward, I've been doing what I do for a long time, and I know many, many people that as they've been trying to establish a habit of going to the fitness center, going to a gym, there are many people who would go to the fitness center and just sit in the parking lot for sometimes even a month at a time, just because they needed to establish that they were actually physically going to get there. It might even just mean physically walking out the door, even if you walk right back in. We'll talk a little bit more about that, but if we're not showing up and actually doing something, it's hard to improve on it. So something to keep in mind as we move forward. And reflecting on your motivation. So hopefully you have a much better idea of what this looks like now, because when the going gets tough, that's going to keep you going. I'm also hoping that now that you have a better idea of what's really motivating you, what's driving you to want to make behavior change, that you've got some kind of visual of that somewhere that you can see it often so that you remember why you're doing what you're doing. Because when those barriers do come up, sometimes it can be really hard to keep the focus on what we want to achieve. And it's easier in the moment to go for that instant gratification. If we can resist that instant gratification and we can really look towards what our motivating factor is, that is going to help us to persevere and continue to put one foot in front of the other. For me personally, when I was in college, I've talked about in other presentations how I became so faithful about running in the morning. And that was because I had an accountability partner in one of my professors. But there were still times, when I wasn't meeting her, that it might be a little bit of a struggle. So for example, one of the things that really helped me was to keep pictures near my bed, because that was my hardest problem, was getting out of bed. Keep pictures near my bed of certain things I wanted to achieve, whether it was a different race or something like that. And on mornings that I was struggling or the weather was really not great, I would roll over and I'd see those pictures and I'd think, well, I'm not going to accomplish that if I don't get moving. So I guess I better get out of bed. But that visual reminder of my motivation really helped me many mornings when what I really wanted to do was roll right back over. And then before we're done today, we're going to talk about really asking yourself how your life would be different or will be different if you achieve what you're setting out to do. Whatever behavior change or habit you're trying to implement or break, how is your life going to look different? At the end of the day, those things are important to consider. And what would the cost be if you don't implement that new habit or behavior change? So we'll take a look at some of those pros and cons. All right. True behavior change literally is identity change. We can convince ourselves to do something for a few days or, a few times, go to the gym, get in a couple of good workouts or eat some salad for a few days. But if we don't shift the belief behind what we're doing, behind our behavior, it's really hard to stick with it long term. And again, that's where we can really reflect on our motivation and why we're doing what we're doing. Improvements are only going to be temporary until they become part of who we are. And one thing to really think about with that is if we're trying to make a change, let's say in our body or in our health overall, let's say you're someone that wants to reduce your blood pressure or reduce your cholesterol or reduce your risk of developing diabetes. Those things take time and they take consistency. So just getting a couple good workouts here and there, eating healthy every once in a while is not going to produce the kind of changes that we're looking for. Those will only come when we become consistent and we're able to repeat those behaviors over a period of time. So as I already mentioned, we have to establish a habit before we can improve it. You have to show up before you can move forward. I would much rather, when I'm working with someone who has never exercised and they're looking to implement the habit of exercise, I would almost rather have them do 5 minutes a day, but have those 5 minutes, that little bit of their exercise, become part of their daily routine, part of their life, part of who they are, and then we can improve on it. I used to run a wellness center up in Flagstaff, and a big part of our focus was diabetes prevention and heart health. And I had one lady that I will just never forget. When she came in and we were doing an initial fitness assessment, I turned the treadmill on, and the treadmill starts going at about half a mile an hour, which for reference, if you're not familiar, you couldn't really even push your shopping cart that slow. It's pretty slow. And we turned the treadmill on and she was hanging on and she started to walk very, very slowly. And after about 90 seconds, When I was just about to increase the speed a little bit, she says, oh, no, 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 I'm fixing to get off of this thing right now. And that was it. She had 90 seconds. Well, she kept coming back and kept coming back because it was important to her to improve her health for the sake of her family. And eventually 90 seconds became 3 minutes. 3 minutes became 5 minutes. 5 minutes became 15. And eventually, do you know, she was coming almost every single day and walking for 30 minutes on that treadmill, and much faster than half a mile an hour. But she had to continue to show up first before she could improve what she was doing. Another thing we're going to talk about more is the more associated your new habit is to a specific time and place, the more likely you are to take action. If we're just kind of arbitrary and say, oh, well, I'm going to work out 3 times this week, when life happens, it's really easy to just put that on the back burner. But if it's part of your schedule, you've written down where, when, how, and why you're going to do something, you're much more likely to stick with it long term. All right. So this is something I want you to do for your homework this week. And I know it looks a little bit confusing until I break it down a little more, but thinking about all the cons of not taking action towards making whatever change it is you're trying to make, and write them down. Thinking about all the pros of not taking action. Thinking about all the cons of taking action and all the pros of taking action. So when I break it down this way, it looks a little friendlier, it makes a little more sense. But let's say we're trying to implement, again, the habit of exercise. Well, if I take no action, that could mean a lot of things. Perhaps my health gets worse or declines. You know, maybe type 2 diabetes runs in my family and I'm already at risk of it, and my risk is going to increase. I might not have as much energy as I want to. Maybe my blood pressure goes up, or I have anxiety. Well, what would benefits be to not taking any action, not implementing the habit of exercise? Going back to the first week and remembering that everything we do has a cue, has a trigger, and has a reward. Whatever we're doing now is working for us in some way, shape, or form, or we wouldn't keep doing it. We're getting some kind of reward. So the pros of taking no action towards developing the habit of exercise might be, well, I don't have to put any effort in. I'm still in my comfort zone. I know what to expect. Exercising doesn't feel good. If you haven't exercised many years, even if you used to, I know full well that it's uncomfortable when you start, but it will get better the more you persist. If you take no action, maybe you consider eating and drinking whatever you want, sleeping in, getting that instant gratification. In the long run, though, what are the pros and cons of taking action? Well, a disadvantage or a con to taking action is that there is effort required. We might have to put some work in if we really want to see behavior change, or if we really want to see our bodies change. Liposuction is not going to solve our problems. That doesn't involve, well, I guess that involves a different kind of effort, but anyway, you know, we may need to get some help or guidance or some education about what it is that we're trying to do, or some of the benefits and reasons to make the behavior change. Fear of failing. And that's one I really feel like can be a big barrier for some people. They become so concerned about not being perfect or not achieving things the way they want to, they almost don't take action and become frozen, because that seems more appealing than taking the risk of trying and failing. However, as we talked about in the first week, those failures are things we can learn from. If we never fail, it's hard to learn from our mistakes. We can always learn what not to do and what didn't work for the future if we have times where something we've tried doesn't, and then we continue to move forward and find a better way or a new way. And sometimes those things can be very helpful to other people. I really think sometimes our failures are so that we can share and encourage others who may be struggling with the same thing. Some other cons might be, again, we have to learn some new skills, get some education, or we may have to acquire some tools. So if we're trying to eat healthier, eat more vegetables, that might mean we have to go shopping and get some vegetables. Or maybe we need to get some new ways to cook things. We may need to buy a pair of shoes if we're trying to go start a walking program. So there may be some things that we need to acquire. And then of course, The pros for taking action, well, hopefully keeping your motivation in mind, feeling better, preventing disease, maybe keeping up with your kids, having more energy. We can really make a long-term impact on our health, but once again, we have to be consistent and stick with it. Making a list of pros and cons can really help you visually to weigh the cost of not taking action versus the cost and the benefit of taking action. Moving in the right direction. So as I mentioned before, sometimes getting started is the hardest part, but you never regret it. Simple example on that, when I've talked in the past about the accountability I had with my professor in college. I was getting up at 5:30 in the morning in the middle of winter to go meet my professor on the corner. And boy, there were mornings that I did not want to get out of bed. I was grouchy when I got up, but I never regretted getting out. It was the getting up and the getting out that was the hard part. But once I was out there, once we were actually running, I never regretted it. I was always so glad that I actually did it. But it's that getting out the door that's the challenge. Getting that habit started is usually the biggest challenge. And if we want to make a habit a big part of our life, we need to make those cues and those triggers a big part of our environment. So if we make sure that the best choice is usually the most obvious one in the long run, we're usually going to make the better choice. And our willpower is not going to beat our environment. If you're someone that loves chocolate and you always have a jar of chocolate or a candy dish on your counter, well, you're likely to probably keep eating it. If you're trying to eat more fruits and vegetables, it's really helpful to put them out where you can see them in a way that's visually appealing. If you're wanting to eat more fruits and vegetables, but they're buried in the bottom of your refrigerator in a drawer somewhere and you have to dig for them, you're much less likely to make that choice at that time. We're a lot more likely to give in or to go towards what we see visually in front of us. So one of the examples there is shoes. Having your workout clothes laid out if that's something that you're trying to do. And I'll tell you a simple trick that's worked really well for me personally is when I know I have to get up really early and it might be a struggle, I will literally sleep in my workout clothes. They're clean, but I will sleep in them because that takes one more step out of the way. It just reduces the friction of getting started a little bit more because now I don't have the excuse of having to get out of my cozy PJs. There's one step taken out of the way. Making better decisions is always easier when the cues are right in front of you. So that might even mean Post-it notes everywhere. Maybe you have a Post-it note on the refrigerator, the dashboard of your car, your computer, or anything like that. We may even try to attach the trigger for a new behavior to an established one. That can really help. So things that you do every day, if we start attaching those triggers to habits that we want to develop, that is one of the strategies we'll talk about a little bit more here in just a second. All right, so some of those things that you do automatically every single day that you don't even have to think about, can we take those triggers, those cues, whether it's the time of day or the action that you're completing, and can we tag it on to another habit that you're trying to develop? That can really start to cement in your mind that it's time to take action on both habits if you begin to associate one with the other. A simple example might be, let's say you want to get better about flossing. Well, if you're trying to get better at flossing, perhaps it's a good idea to take the floss or the plackers or whatever it is and put it right next to where your toothbrush is. That would prompt you visually to see the dental floss and actually use it rather than perhaps having it buried in a drawer in the bathroom somewhere underneath a bunch of other things. Sometimes taking one behavior that we want to do and pairing it with another can be really helpful. Let's take, for example, when you get home in the evening, you have a favorite show or podcast, but you also want to go for a walk in the evening. Perhaps you can say to yourself, well, I'm in the habit of watching that podcast or listening to it. What if I listen to that podcast while I'm going for a walk or while I'm exercising? Then that podcast can become the cue for taking the walk. There's lots of different ways that we can do this. And if that's something that you would like a little more guidance with, definitely let me know. And hopefully I can help you to identify some of those things. Creating an environment for success. So I've talked about that a little bit already. If you're surrounded by things that are tempting for you that you want to stop engaging in or indulging in, you're always going to have an uphill battle. Out of sight, out of mind can be very helpful when that's the case. I mean, you think about the idea of, for anyone who's ever tried to quit drinking or smoking, it's really not helpful to continue to go into places where everyone else is drinking and smoking because it's going to be very tempting. Of course, when it comes to eating, that gets a little trickier because we have to continue to eat. But if you have something that's a real weakness for you, knowing that it's in your house, knowing that you can see it is going to make it a lot more challenging. So I'll always throw myself out there as an example and as a guinea pig. One of the things that I've come to learn about myself is I used to have a very strong soda addiction, but there's some emotional ties to it. And for many people, a lot of our habits and things that we enjoy do have an emotional tie. The more we can understand those things, the better we can help to replace some of those with other things. But mine came from, as a child, my grandfather managed a 7-Up plant for many, many years. And so what that meant was he would bring cases of soda to our house almost every day. I grew up on it. My parents still drink a tremendous amount of it, but for me, certain kinds of soda also has a warm, fuzzy grandpa feeling to it. I have come to learn that if it's in my house, eventually I'll drink it. So I don't bring it home. And thankfully, my husband is fine with that and he's on board. I realize not everyone is in that situation and that some family dynamics or roommate situations could be challenging. But if that's something that you struggle with, someone in your home is constantly bringing something around that you don't want to have, I can certainly help you try to figure out some strategies for that as well. Hopefully they'll at least work with you to hide it. You know, for example, if you love Ben and Jerry's, but you're trying to stop eating Ben and Jerry's and that's all your significant other wants to bring home, perhaps they're even willing to put it in a paper bag, hide it from you, just so that you don't physically see it. But let's talk a little bit more about that environment for success. So just some samples here. Again, the habit of exercise, maybe you sleep in your workout clothes, have an accountability partner. If you know someone is looking for you or waiting for you to show up, or even waiting for you to give them a report of what you did, you're much more likely to do it, as well as having a specific time. Having your clothes already packed, all the gym bag ready to go, or any accessories that you need, like a water bottle, your headphones, whatever, have them all ready. If you're trying to eat more vegetables, perhaps that means you go shopping on the weekend, have everything chopped and prepared so that things are readily available and you don't have to worry about it during the week when you get busy. Because let's face it, when we get busy and we don't have our greatest choices right in front of us, it's a lot easier to call DoorDash sometimes than it is to make those healthier choices. If one of your goals is drinking more water, maybe you grab a water bottle that you love, that has some kind of sentimental value to you, or just that you like, and you keep it nearby with maybe some even reminders to drink, but having it next to you and maybe keeping a line on it of how much you want to drink per day can be very helpful. If you're wanting to take stretch breaks or just do some yoga, if your yoga mat is in your basement somewhere collecting dust, it's not likely to remind you, but maybe you have a mat near your desk so that you can see it, or set reminders on your computer or your phone to remind you when it's time to do that. If one of your goals is waking up earlier, and I will tell you, this is another trick that has worked really well for me, especially now that we have alarms on our wrist and on our, with our phone next to our bed. If I know I have to be up very early and I'm a little concerned, I will take my alarm and set it at least across the room, if not somewhere else that I have to physically get up and go get it, so that just rolling over, hitting snooze is not an option. So there's a lot more strategies. And again, if you need a little more guidance with that, please let me know. And I'm happy to help you figure out how to create your own personal environment that will greatly increase the likelihood of your personal success. All right, making it happen. So we're always going to go back to reflecting on that motivation, understanding that the changes that'll have to be made to your current habits, and setting a game plan for execution. We're going to come back to that SMART here in a second, but knowing your resources. I feel like it's really critical to have some kind of support system, whether it's a friend, a family member, whether it's me, a coworker, Someone that when you're having a hard time or you feel discouraged will lift you up and not drag you down. I had a roommate in college who I loved to pieces, but she would always do things like, I'm going to get Ben and Jerry's. You're not going to make me do this by myself, are you? And she would try to pull me into things I didn't want to do. As much as I love that friend, I needed another friend, the professor, who was going to keep me accountable and keep me showing up even when I didn't want to. Having some kind of support system is so critical. Focusing on execution. Don't overload yourself with too much at once. Focus on 1 to 2 changes that are feasible and realistic. Most research indicates people who try to change 3 or more things at one time are very rarely successful long-term. In fact, the success rate for changing 3 or more things at once goes less than about 10%. If we try to focus on 1 to 2 things at a time, practice those things, implement them for several weeks before we try to add anything else, the chances for success go up to about 80% for long-term. That's pretty significant. And I'll give you a quick example on that. One of your fellow coworkers started making one-on-one consultations with me about 6 weeks ago. And we've continued to just check in once a week. But initially this person, came to me needing to lose literally about 75 pounds and was wanting to see results very quickly because their health was starting to be adversely affected. And the more we talked, this person was really like, all right, I need to start exercising now. And I want it to be intense because I need the results to happen quickly. And was just kind of going through these rabbit holes that I hear quite a bit, like a New Year's resolution when we try to do too much too soon. And of course, I recognize that that is a recipe for disaster and probably not lasting too long. So after getting a better picture of everything that was happening, I just simply suggested that I really thought if all this person did for the first couple weeks was either eliminate or cut out the amount of soda they were drinking and simply cut out fried food, that's it. They would probably start to see major results pretty quickly. I didn't ask them to make any other dietary changes and not even really worrying about getting the exercise in yet. They were a little skeptical, but started keeping track of things. And after the first week, lost 2.5 pounds. And after the second week, lost 2.5 pounds. And has now been consistently losing 2.5 pounds for 6 weeks. After about week 3, when we met weekly, this person said, I've got good news and bad news. I said, well, what's the good news? The good news is I lost 2.5 pounds again. So what's the bad news? I haven't done any exercise yet. I said, that's okay. Because now this person has felt some success, knows that they can accomplish it. And we began adding in the exercise and they're starting to feel better. And they're starting to eat more vegetables automatically without me even really having to coach them. But we need that little bit of success and manageable changes that we can make to know that we're able to achieve it and give us the motivation to keep going. And reframing expectations. I really do want to emphasize that a little bit. Positive thinking and avoiding negative self-talk are really important. If you have a bad day or you give in sometime, don't beat yourself up. It's the consistency overall that's a lot more important. You absolutely should let yourself, have a cupcake every once in a while or whatever it is you want to do without beating yourself up. You're still going to make progress towards your goal if most of the time you're consistent. But being realistic, so if your goal is losing weight, I always like to throw out there that it is only safe and reasonable to expect to lose approximately 1% of your body weight each week. Any more than that, and we really know that it's likely not all coming from fat, and it's likely coming also from muscle and water. And that's the last thing we want to lose. So making sure that we're realistic with what we're expecting and how quickly we're expecting it can really help to make sure that we don't set ourselves up for disappointment. Every step you're taking towards your new goal is a step you weren't taking before, and it's moving you towards progress. Back in the day, I used to run marathons. I don't anymore. But I'll tell you, the only way I ever got through any of them was from the start, even thinking, oh, I'm one step closer than I was before, and just keep putting one foot in front of the other. All right, so habit implementation. You want to plan how you intend to implement your new habit. Because again, if we don't plan and just say, well, I'm just going to start eating more vegetables, it's really easy to just give in and, go with what the old pattern is. So making sure it's specific and clear what behavior you're going to engage in, at what time, and in what location. So there's just some examples. But again, if you write it out, our bodies are very tied to times of the day and to, again, those certain triggers. So if my body becomes accustomed to that every morning at 6 o'clock, that's when I'm walking out the door, even if I just start with 2 minutes, I get used to that, and then I can build on those 2 minutes. And once I master the art of showing up, then I can make improvements. So I also definitely want you to consider when you're most likely to be successful as you're making your plan. If you've got several kids and the mornings are just chaos for you because you're making breakfast and getting lunches ready and trying to get kids out the door or whatever, maybe that's not the best time to plan your own personal workout. Try to think of when you will have the least amount of friction and the most amount of success, and try to implement the habit at that time. So I guess we've mentioned this multiple times, but I don't think I can say it too much. And that is, the more associated your new habit is with a specific time and location, the more likely you are to take action. Okay, so we have already talked about SMART goals a little bit, but I'm going to go back to specific. They have to be specific. And so realistically, I hear all the time things like, well, I just want to feel better, or I just want to look a little more toned, or whatever it is. Those are great things to strive for. But the problem is there's no way to measure if we're actually making progress towards them. So instead, something like, I want to start eating 3 servings of vegetables a day. Currently, I'm not eating any. Okay, now we can measure that. Or I want to lose 2 inches on my waist. I want to fit into these pants. I want to walk 3 miles a day. Whatever it is, if we have an actual number we can put around it, then we can know if we're making progress. We have a measurement. And then we need to have specific action items that we're going to take. And that is where the planning comes in. If I'm going to start to eat more vegetables, I probably need to make sure that I've got them in the house and I'm ready to have them. So we may need some certain action items. Realistic. That's what I just mentioned with reframing our expectations. Don't set yourself up for disappointment. I had a person just yesterday ask me, I'm going to visit my family in a month. Do you think it's reasonable that I can lose 20 pounds between now and then? It's not physically possible. And thinking that that person could do that is really setting them up for failure and that unrealistic expectation. We need to know that those changes are not going to happen overnight. But we also want to make sure that the goal is definitely something, that we can achieve, and time sensitive. We have to increase slowly if we really want our new habits to stick, our new behaviors to stick. However, if you're not making any progress towards your overall goal within a few weeks, then we may need to reassess the plan and figure out if we need to take a slightly different plan, or if there's something that's getting in the way of progress that we didn't anticipate. So reassessing the program. All right. Success equals motivation. Well, that's what I just spoke about a little bit ago with one of your coworkers who has really started losing 2.5 pounds. Keeping in mind, this individual started off around 265 pounds. So losing 2.5 pounds a week is very safe and very reasonable. That is going to slow down, and this person understands that. But that little amount of success, this person actually said to me literally in a consult yesterday, every time I want KFC, I just remember how much success I've had without eating KFC, and then I go eat watermelon instead. Well, that's fantastic, but that success was critical to the motivation. So what does that mean? We've got to make your goals manageable enough, the steps to get to your goals manageable enough that you see some success pretty quickly, and it gives you the confidence to know you can do it and to keep moving forward. So again, that comes back to the start small. What 1 or 2 things do you want to focus on first? If you have multiple things, narrow it down, pick 1 or 2. And then be a 9 or a 10. What that means is on a scale of 1 to 10, you are a 9 or a 10 that you know you can achieve what it is you're setting out to do. So again, as an example, for people that are trying to establish the habit of exercise, I'll typically ask them how much time they can reasonably devote each day or each week to exercise and how much they'd like to do. And a lot of times the response I get is something like, oh, 5 days a week for like 30 minutes or 4 days a week for 30 minutes. And that's an amazing goal. That's wonderful. But remembering you've got to show up first, I'll usually suggest, okay, well, what if for the first couple of weeks we make your goal, maybe we make it 5 minutes, 5 days a week, or we make it 2 days a week for 20 minutes. And a lot of times they'll get a funny look. But the thing is, they'll think, well, that's easy. And I'm like, that's the point, because we need to know that you can actually make it happen. So if we set your goal at 5 days for 30 minutes, and when I talk to you next week, you've only gotten, let's say you've only gotten 5 minutes each of those 5 days, or you got 3 days for 20 minutes. Well, then you feel like a failure. But if we made your goal twice a week for 20 minutes, now you feel like a success and you know you can do it. And sometimes, like I said, that is all we need just to keep going. If the steps to your goals are achievable, you will keep climbing them. I love that. Focus on the step in front of you, not the whole staircase. In the case of that one person that I was mentioning that started at 265, just focusing on the fat loss, initially that can become very daunting if you're not seeing a little bit of progress and if the step in front of you is not achievable, because sometimes it can seem like the goal is really far off. And that's one of the reasons, again, it's so important, because if it's too far off, that habit loop is a little bit too big and it can be really hard to keep going. So as we're looking at setting some of those bigger overall goals, sometimes it's really good to know, are you someone that is intrinsically motivated? In other words, you've discovered that your motivation is something that comes from within you, or are you extrinsically motivated? Are you willing to do it for someone else or something else? Either way is okay. We just need to know that. If you want to start a walking program, but you're not internally very motivated, perhaps it means you sign up for an event that's a charity fundraiser, and maybe you start raising money for MS or cancer or something that's very near and dear to you. You'll still get into the pattern. You're still going to implement walking into your life. It's going to become a habit, but perhaps we need to focus on a different type of goal depending on what motivates you. So I do want you to keep in mind that habit formation can take anywhere from 3 weeks to 3 months. So that consistency, that showing up, cannot be underestimated. Staying on track. So we've talked about this. Research shows you're 2 to 3 more times likely to stay committed when it is scheduled at a regular, consistent time. That helps to build routine. We are creatures of routine. So in other words, rather than I will exercise 3 times this week and leaving it up in the air, I will walk out the door at 6 a.m. on Monday, Wednesday, Friday, or I will go to this class at these times on these days. I'll tell the instructor to look for me so that you've got an accountability and you've got a scheduled time. So this is my stab at a goal pyramid. I did not invent the concept of a goal pyramid. I completely stole it, but it is absolutely brilliant. I just like the way it breaks it down. So we've got our long-term goal visually in range, but then we break it down to what's reasonable to achieve monthly, weekly, and then we literally look at what am I doing today? What am I doing tomorrow? What am I doing each day this week? What step am I climbing to take me to the top? Immediate goals at the bottom, that is going to be things, for example, as we mentioned, if one of your goals is to eat 3 servings of vegetables each day, but you have no vegetables in your house, an immediate goal would be making a list, maybe finding some recipes and going shopping and getting the vegetables that you need. Perhaps if your shoes have holes in them or all you have is flip-flops and you want to start walking, we need to plan to go to a shoe store and find a pair of shoes that's going to work well for us. And then when you do achieve something, when you climb a step for the day, check it off, keep track of it. Who doesn't love having a to-do list with several items checked off on it? You know you accomplished something for that day. So if we have to wait, this is what I just mentioned, if you have to wait for the overall goals to arrive, it becomes very challenging. But if each day you can see you're making progress, you're accomplishing at least some of those small steps that you set out for yourself, It is going to also help keep you motivated. However you want to do it, check it off in your planner, make a list, draw a pyramid, whatever it might be, something that's going to let you know you've accomplished one of your action steps. All right, so wrapping it up, action items for this week. Creating a SMART goal or goals, not too many, and keeping a visual reminder somewhere that you can see it every day. It's going to help remind you. Create a goal pyramid. Now, you don't have to use the triangle. I just like the way it's laid out, but whatever format you like to have your long-term goal in mind, breaking down what's reasonable weekly or monthly, but more importantly, what am I doing today? What behavior am I doing at what time and in what location? If necessary, set up those visual reminders and create the environment. If you're looking to eat more fruits and vegetables, have them readily available where you can see them. If there's something you don't want to continue to eat, try to see if you can get it out of your sight so that you're not tempted by it. Identify any tools or supplies like going to get vegetables or shoes that you need to accomplish your goals. And then consider some potential habit pairs that might make it a little bit easier for you to get started. The last thing, create a pro and con list for moving towards action. I know that looks like a lot, but it's really all focused around the same thing. If you're someone that's on a team or you found that accountability partner, or if it's me, share with someone. When you take a step towards your goal, you did something you said you were going to do, share it. Give each other ideas on what's worked for you. Something that you've either succeeded at or failed at might be just what someone else needs to hear in order to keep putting one step in front of the other. When you climb up a step, share it. Share your little victories of the day. They will continue to keep you motivated and taking the steps that you need to get to your overall goal. And once again, if you would like some more guidance, if you'd like to set up a one-on-one consultation,